Ohio State on the cusp of winning the East Division and getting to Indianapolis for the Big Ten title game. That seems to be all the Buckeyes wanted to talk about on Monday here at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Doug Lesmerises with Bill Landis and Ari Wasserman. It's interesting, guys. Everybody knows Ohio State's going to win the East right now. I mean, they're not going to lose both these games to Indiana and Michigan. But when we did our preseason poll, especially after Braxton Miller got hurt, Michigan State was the absolute overwhelming pick of writers in the Big Ten to win the East. So for Urban Meyer and the players to talk about how basically the only thing they've been thinking about all year is getting back to that Big Ten title game, because that's where everything starts. If you get back, then you have a chance to go farther than you did last year. Otherwise, you're falling short of last year. Nobody thought they were going to do that. So here we are, a long way from the Virginia Tech loss, Ari. As we think about this Ohio State team getting ready for Indiana on Saturday, what is it that you think has helped them get here, has helped them be this team compared to the team they were after week 2?
Urban Meyer talks about how this is the most improved team maybe he's ever been around. And the most ironic part, I think I'll start by saying the thing that we knew for sure was going to be good in the defensive line might be the thing that they're trying to, shore up a little bit with the rush defense and whatnot. But to me, I'm obsessed with playmakers on offense, and I think that the receivers are drastically better than I thought they were going to be. Now, of course, I'm sure we'll get into it. JT's a lot better than we anticipated Ohio State's quarterback would be after they lost Braxton Miller. But, some of the plays that those guys are making, they play fast and they're reliable. And I think that as the week progresses, even though they didn't perform that well in the snow, that the receivers have become, a very hard thing for defenses to contend with. And I'm not sure I necessarily expected, without a superstar or a first-round draft pick that, stands out, that Ohio State would be in this position with their skill players.
It's funny to think Dontre Wilson is out.
Yeah.
And Urban Meyer did say that they missed him against Minnesota, but it wasn't like a gaping hole. I mean, I think coming into the season, a lot of people thought Dontre Wilson was going to be the number one playmaker. And when he got hurt, it was kind of like, well, they have Jalen Marshall and they still have Michael Thomas and these other guys. It wasn't like a thing where if they didn't have depth there at a position where they had not been good the first 2 years, a Dontre Wilson injury would have been devastating.
Which I think is what's so interesting. And if we're going to talk about individual players, Jalen Marshall probably had his worst game of his season on Saturday, and as it's been well noted, he's got some flack on social media for the fumble on the going in for a touchdown, and then of course on the punt return. But his reliability, his explosiveness, his growth has been the reason why Ohio State's been able to endure that loss. And at the H-back position, which is Urban Meyer's favorite position to talk about and the most important position outside of quarterback in his offense, he's really shown that he's got a versatility of explosive playmaking ability, not only off jet sweeps and things like that, but he's also catching passes downfield. I think he's coming along really nicely.
Ari is the playmaker of our group. Bill, you are the line expert.
The people mover.
The what?
People mover. I move people.
The People Mover is one of my favorite rides at Walt Disney World. What have you thought of the way the offensive line has played? I found it interesting at a game like that at Minnesota last week when they weren't going to throw the ball all over the place. If you didn't like your offensive line, that could have been a little iffy. Yeah. What do you think of what the Buckeyes think of their offensive line as we get to the last 2 games of the regular season?
I think it's been kind of an evolving thing. Urban Meyer has, not so much lately, but particularly earlier in the year, said that the line wasn't playing up to Ohio State standards. There were still some things they were trying to figure out, particularly in the interior. But I think they've come along nicely. If you look back to last year, the thing that Ohio State did really well on offense was run it with Carlos Hyde and Braxton Miller behind a veteran offensive line that's got a couple guys starting in the NFL right now. And coming into this season, really the only sure thing was Taylor Decker, and the other 4 spots were kind of you didn't know what you were going to get. And the first 2 games of the season, it still looked like you didn't know what you were going to get against Navy and against Virginia Tech. Since then, though, I think they've come along, probably about as well as you can ask. Against Michigan State and Minnesota, who are arguably the 2 best defenses Ohio State has seen this year, they protected J.T. Barrett very well. They ran the ball well when they had to up in Minnesota. So I think you have to be happy. I think there's still room to grow, and I think they know that. But to this point, they've done pretty well.
One of the things about the defensive line, which you talked about, Ari, as I think before the year, that was one thing, you thought for sure that was going to be good. We thought, are there potentially 3 first-round draft picks on that defensive line with Joey Bosa, who still has 1 more year at least, and then Michael Bennett and Noah Spence. Noah Spence gets suspended. He's lost for the year. You knew that would be a loss. So everything we thought about the defensive line, we thought of it thinking Their two ends were going to be Bosa and Spence, and how do you stop either one of those guys? Losing Noah Spence really, I think, has turned out to almost be really more of a loss than losing Braxton Miller, because they absolutely had somebody who was ready to step in for Braxton Miller. Steve Miller has been solid, but he's just not the explosive kind of potential sack guy that Noah Spence would have been. I wonder about this defensive line, though. We've talked about the depth all year. I'm not sure we can talk about the depth anymore. Basically, what they said, in February and in the preseason has not come true. I mean, Larry Johnson wants to rotate guys. We've talking to him now, and he's saying, well, if you have good starters, you don't have to rotate them. It's like, well, it's not happening. What they said was going to happen is not happening. But the starters are still talented guys for the most part. Bosa has been, I think, as good as anybody could have hoped. Yeah. He's dominant at times. Bennett felt like he got off to a slow start. He's played, I think, very well the last two games on the interior, but teams are still running the ball. Like, what is it as we're trying to figure this out? To me, it's almost not like the defensive line players are good, but maybe the things that a defensive line should do as a group maybe haven't been quite as good as maybe we thought they'd be.
Yeah, I think coaches like to throw around the word complementary football, and I know that's kind of coach speak, but I don't think we've seen that much with Ohio State's defensive line. It's been a whole lot of Bosa, and then the last two games Bennett has come on, but still, and I don't want to be critical because they've still been pretty good, but I think Adolphus Washington might have some more, and Steve Miller, I don't know if he's reached his ceiling or not. I just think expecting Steve Miller to produce the way that Noah Spence was going to produce is probably a bit unfair. So there's going to be a drop off there, and he's been pretty good. But you're right. There's something that seems to be missing. I guess against Minnesota there were some plays where they were getting really blown off the ball, and I know they weren't too concerned about that today, which surprised me a little bit. But going back and watching some of the runs that David Cobb had in that game, he had gaping holes at points, and a lot of it was the interior just kind of getting blown out, and maybe that has something to do with the lack of rotation that they thought they were going to have, and they don't have it, and at points these guys maybe are a little bit tired. I don't know.
The rest of the defense, tackling had been an issue for a couple years here, and talking to the Buckeyes this week, they feel like they've tackled pretty well. The missed tackles at Minnesota stood out a little more because we hadn't seen that as much. And we talk so much about the pass defense in the offseason. They're not getting beat for 80-yard passes. They're not giving up easy third down throws. Ari, has the defense as a whole improved the way you thought it might? Or are you surprised by anything defensively?
I think the defense is in the middle of what Ohio State defenses used to be in the mid to late 2000s and what it was last year. I don't think that it's as susceptible as it was a year ago in giving up big plays and it being the reason why Ohio State's not competing in a game they should win. On the other end of the spectrum, I don't think that Ohio State's defense is imposing. I think that they are at times out there to give up big plays, and sometimes, even Michigan State, there was a drive in the second quarter, and granted, Michigan State's offensive line is pretty good, but where they were blowing Ohio State completely off the ball, and Langford was getting what they wanted. If you remember the drive in the second quarter when it looked like Michigan State was was ready to go in and take control of that game. So what I think is Ohio State is, the way I would describe them, is, I guess, passable. I don't think it's a dominant force by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't quite think it's as easy to expose for huge back-breaking plays as it was a year ago.
We love to talk about the playoff. I don't think everything we write about or talk about can just be in the playoff context. We'll drive ourselves crazy trying to compare Ohio State to TCU constantly. But I think possibly what this team is now is, as we think about the best teams in the country, do we think that Ohio State's offense is good enough to compete at the highest level with the best teams in the country? Offense, yes or no?
Offense for sure.
Offense?
Yes.
The offense is at that level. And I think maybe the defense is good enough with playmakers who, Joey Bosa maybe can throw a running back into a quarterback and get a key sack when you need it. Mm-hmm. With guys, someone's going to tip a pass and create an interception. They are intercepting passes at a very high rate this year. They are getting more turnovers than sometimes we've seen in the past. And I know Urban Meyer hates bend but don't break. Like, he never wants them to be that. But if they're going to give up some yards, in this new era of high-flying offenses, sometimes you give up yards. But I think it's, basically the formula right now is an offense that can, at its best, score with anybody, a first-round pick defensive end who's going to be a pain to block, and some guys on the back end who can make some plays. And then if they give up some yards in between, that's an issue. But it seems like it has come together in the end. Bill, whatever happens, if whether it's a bowl or the playoff, Ohio State's going to play some good teams here at the end. Yep. They're going to play a good team, probably Wisconsin, but they're going to play a good team in the Big Ten Championship. Then they're going to play good teams after that. Should Ohio State feel good as they get to this part of the year where they're going to play a really good team, or is there something that would nag you to say, I think that would be their Achilles heel at this point?
No, I don't think there's anything that sticks out as an Achilles heel. I think they should feel pretty good, and you kind of touched it. I mean, everyone gets scored on. I don't know if there's a defense out there that hasn't been scored on this year. Maybe Alabama's, but if you look at the teams at the top, they've all been scored on at some point, so I don't think that's too big of a concern. And their offense is rolling right now, so I think they should feel pretty good about their ability to compete at the top.
Ari?
I mean, I agree. I think when you look into the context of the top 6 teams in front of them, they all have had losses except one. They've all had their struggles. I think Ohio State would be fit to compete with any of those teams. And when we get back to the basis of what we were talking about at the beginning of the video, that's pretty remarkable considering Ohio State was replacing 4 offensive linemen. They lost their best player 2 weeks before the season. Noah Spence got suspended. I mean, the things that this team not only has had to overcome, now Dontre Wilson's injury, to be in a situation where we're even talking about this, how could you not feel good about that? I think all of us would have seriously questioned that they could get to this point if you would have asked me, and we did 2 months ago. So, if they don't feel good about it, then I don't know. I mean, it's about as good as it probably could have gone, all things considered.
It's funny to think there are some great players in college football. There's some really good players in the Big Ten. People were talking about all the great running backs in the Big Ten today with Melvin Gordon and David Cobb and Tevin Coleman for Indiana coming in this week and everyone else. And Urban Meyer sort of was like, well, don't forget Ezekiel Elliott. Let me throw my guy in there. As good as this team, it seems like the hallmark of this team is not necessarily 9 first-round draft picks at your point. I mean, they are pretty solid across the board. There's not Sammy Watkins on this receiving crew. There's not who knows what Ezekiel Elliott will develop into, but there's not a sure first-round pick. J.T. Barrett's probably going to be a good player. He's a freshman. He's not Marcus Mariota right now. Bosa is that guy, but this is not A.J. Hawk, Dante Whitner, Bobby Carpenter. Let's go through all the future NFL guys. It's an interesting team that it seems like they have developed and they have improved, but they've done it sort of as a collective group rather than saying these 2 or 3 guys, they're going to have to win us the game every week. Ohio State will host Indiana Saturday at noon. We will be there. With a win, the Buckeyes would clinch the East Division. With a loss, everybody was going to be like, what just happened? Stick with us all week here at cleveland.com. Again, from the Woody Hayes Athletic Center for Ari Wasserman and Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises for cleveland.com.